morning's scripture is part of a long portion of the Gospel of John, in which Jesus is saying a long goodbye to his disciples. Chapters 13 through 17 in the Gospel of John all take place on the night before the crucifixion, on the night when Jesus shared the Passover meal with his disciples. It's John's Gospel that tells us specifically about how deeply he loved them and how he was at pains to prepare them for the changes, the transition that lay ahead in their lives. Chapter 15 begins with what we traditionally call the parable of the vine and the branches, using the same kind of metaphor and symbolic language that we find throughout the gospel. Jesus talks about his relationship with them and with us being like the vineyard, in which the branches are connected to the vine, and the branches have no life and can produce nothing unless they're living in or abiding in that vine. He goes on to say this: as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy might be in you and your joy might be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, that one would lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command you. I don't call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have told you everything that I've heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I have appointed you to go and to bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name will be given to you. I've given you these commandments so that you may love one another. A chronic condition that I've had since about age 14 is my height. Got this tall at about that age, except for some shrinkage that I'm noticing in recent years. I've had this condition all my life. And I call it a condition because there are many reasons that it's good to be tall. You're happy to be tall. Seems normal to me in many ways. But there's also a liability with it, at least in the world in which I lived growing up and in our culture. If you're a guy who's tall, it's automatically assumed that you're going to excel in basketball. And I didn't. Neither did our son, who's taller than me, and who has also learned to be playful with that chronic condition that he also has. Among his moonlight jobs, Jeff is a high school theater teacher and a very talented, energetic guy, and among the things that he does for fun and extra income sometimes is stand-up comedy. And a regular routine, or a regular part of one of his comedy routines, is playing on his height. And again, that same phenomenon I'm talking about, saying that people often come up to him and look up and say, "Gosh, do you play basketball?" And he says when they do, he makes every effort to loom over them and say, "No, do you play miniature golf?" My high school basketball days were short-lived. 2 years of my 4 years in high school. The last 2 years, by the way, when we moved to a new community, and it was a small high school, and the other extracurricular areas that I'd been involved in over the years weren't available there. And when you're a tall guy in a small high school, it's inevitable you're going to go out for basketball. And true to form, I'd not played organized sports that much leading up to that. Don't have the natural coordination and ability. I managed to get in enough quarters to get my letter, but it was kind of an easygoing, playful thing. One of my best friends was the trainer on the basketball team, and he tells the story, or he told me the story, about an evening we were going to an away game And you got to appreciate the culture of small town Kentucky here. All the coaches know each other, and this is the first game we've had with this school, and he's catching up with the other coach, and it's the usual, how you doing, how's the family, and all that. How's the team doing this year? Oh, we've got this problem, we don't have shooting guards or whatever. And about this time, I'm walking through a short doorway and having to lean down to get under it, and he says to his friend, the other coach, and don't let the big guy scare you. Now, I remember and reflect on this because while it was an interesting part of my adolescent development, we can all relate, I would assume, with a childhood memory in which whether or not you were going to be competent in an athletic activity was a measuring point about whether you felt esteemed or included in what's going on in the world around you. I'm talking about the playgrounds that most of us were involved in. And the playground activity, when it's time to choose up sides for whatever the sport was, in this case basketball, if you were the one who got chosen last and begrudgingly, you know that your sense of confidence and self-esteem went down accordingly with that environment as well. One of my favorite songwriters and singers, Janis Ian, who looks like this now, but who looked like this.
Okay, just a sec.
Some years ago, when the hit song At 17, her poetic expression of that adolescence and childhood experience was expressed. For those of us who knew the pain of Valentines that never came and those whose names were never called when choosing sides for basketball. Powerful poetry because it illustrates that early childlike part of all of us that wants to be accepted and is especially affirmed and uplifted when we're chosen, when your name is called, when you are among those that are called out and affirmed and included. That's the power of Jesus' word here to the disciples and to us across the ages when he said, "You didn't choose me, but I chose you." You and I were chosen, called out. And that primary part of all of us that needs that kind of esteem and acceptance is what our Lord engages in directly in that initial invitation into relationship with him. And we see this especially in John's Gospel, in the way the disciples had come into relationship with Jesus. Different than the other Gospels where we're told that he went and called them away from their nets saying, "Follow me," and they made a distinct choice to leave everything and follow. In John's Gospel, the stories about the calling of those first disciples are ones in which he seems to know more about them than they do about him at the outset, even though he'd never met them. He says to Nathanael, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip even told you about me." He says otherwise, "No one comes to me unless the Father draws them to me." So the whole experience that we see in John's Gospel is one in which he has been calling, choosing, drawing out people into relationship with him. You didn't choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and to bear fruit that will last. We're chosen, esteemed, included, for a purpose. We're called into relationship that has a purpose. And throughout John's Gospel, the experience that draws us into that purpose to live in relationship with Christ and to be productive and faithful comes as a result of being in an experience in which we are present with him. I mentioned earlier, the word that is used in the beginning of this portion of Scripture that's used throughout John's Gospel, meno in Greek, abide, stay, remain, is a powerful and important word. As Jesus says, "Abide in me." That's how you are able to fulfill the commandments that he gives, just as Jesus abides in God. A powerful and unusual relationship, hard for our words to give explanation to, in which we come into special relationship with God because of that opportunity that Jesus Christ makes possible in our lives. He characterizes it in another term that, again, has powerful meaning for us. When he says, "You're my friends. You're my friends if you do what I command you." Don't call you servants anymore, because servants don't know what the master is doing, but you are my friends because I've drawn you into this relationship and told you everything that I've learned from my Father. there again, that strikes upon a deep need that we all have. And when we're told here, that's the relationship we're called into, what a gift it is. And yet, what a powerfully different depth of meaning it has as Jesus talks about it here than the way that friend can often play out in our life or in our experience. That which is both most profound and significant in our lives can in some ways be the most surface and superficial as well. How many friendly advertisers have you seen in a commercial calling you friend, and you say, is this guy my friend? I have standing jokes about certain pastor colleagues who've used that term very freely and will often call me friend or buddy, and I'll say, when did we get to be friends and I didn't realize it? Of course, the phenomena of social network has brought friends into a whole new concept. Facebook has gone in a few short years from a few to 900 million subscribers. And if you're a subscriber, you got friends. I need to confess that this is a growing edge for me. I'm on Facebook, and I need to learn to be a better Facebook friend than I am. And while I confess my difficulty with it, and that is to say, Sylvia is the one who monitors my Facebook page and tells me when I need to start paying attention to it or notice what's going on with different folks or tune in or connect, that I'm still getting over the learning curve with it. But I firmly believe that in the transition that our culture is moving through, and particularly for our church as we move into a new stage in which the ways that we communicate with each other and engage each other in community and all of that, many aspects of social networking are ones that we're going to need to work more carefully and intentionally on in the life of the church. But I've got 233 friends without even trying. And I'm conflicted about a lot of those because those friends set you into other networks and you start getting friend requests and you say, well, how can I tell that person I don't want to be his or her friend? But at the same time, do I want 233 more people who I hear what they had for breakfast or engage with in varying ways day to day? Our children are much more adept at this. All three of our adult children are on Facebook. The most assertive and engaging of the three of them has 1,300 friends. Now, Tessa's a very outgoing and friendly person, but I challenge whether she's really friends with all those 1,300 people. See the kind of runaway thing that we get involved in here? And we use that term, which in the case of Facebook means there's some linkage. They're a friend of a friend, or we are part of a common interest group, or we went to the same school, or we're connected in one way or another. But that's a much more lightweight kind of concept than what Jesus means when he says, I've called you friends. Or what the word phileo, the Greek here, meant in the ancient world. How it did connote a deep bond, as powerful as the bond of family. And that Jesus, in saying, I've called you friends, I've drawn you into closer relationship than that between a master and a servant, that he was talking about engaging us in a deeper, more intimate connection that in the light of the culture in which it was said, was saying, I've made you my own. That Jesus' life, ministry, death, and resurrection are all in the context of this friendship that he has with us and towards which he draws us. And so to live in the power of that relationship is to be that kind of deep friend and to follow towards the fuller expression of living out what it is to be in God's presence and in his presence, which is to fully love as he loves. I give you a commandment that you love one another, not in the way that you're used to loving each other, not in the easy, cozy kind of way that you know to love each other, but that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than the one who lays down life for one's friends. So to be a follower of such a friend, again, is something at a much deeper level than the social networking of following someone on Twitter. It's following at the level of a committed love that calls us into the giving of ourselves in the service of and in the expression of that love. This coincides, of course, with a day when we're celebrating the formative love in our relationship with mothers. And we celebrate that in Christian community with the full understanding that that relationship has all kinds of dynamics and means different things to each of us across the scale and common things to all of us. The clear reality, though, is that simply the relationship of being a biological mother can mean a wide gamut in terms of how you were understood or perceived or how that relationship is lived out. Some irony that the voluminous presence of the media in recent days, approaching Mother's Day, brings up certain sensational understandings of motherhood and how that's experienced. Octomom, Nadia Suleiman, who none of us have really gotten to know, and unfortunately the media coverage has been so sensationalistic that we're probably led to unlikely or premature conclusions about someone, but famous, or infamous, whatever your take is on it, because of being the mother of 14 children on limited income, and when bankruptcy was declared within the last week or so, she was back in the news again. Interestingly enough, in one interview, saying, if you're going to focus on me, focus on this other questionable mother, known as Tanning Mom, Patricia Krinkle, and the controversy around whether or not the child was exposed to a tanning bed, court charges about parental neglect. You see, the image of mother is one that we lift up because of some of the values and in some ways vilify folks who challenge those, although we don't know the whole story of their lives, nor are we called to be in a position of judgment. Other recent events, like the recent tornadoes, brought a perspective to a mother who laid down life. If you remember those stories or the media coverage, the young mother in Clark County, Indiana, just outside of Louisville, in the tornadoes that hit there a few weeks ago, covered her children and as a result lost both of her legs. Lay down your life. That kind of instinctive, not even conscious thinking of how out of that concern for our children we extend ourselves even at the cost of our own well-being. Jesus says, love one another as I've loved you. No one has greater love than to lay down your life. And as I've indicated with the panorama and all the points in between when we're talking about that particular relationship between biological mother and children, the broader one that I think we're drawn to in the context of Christian community is how that kind of caring, self-giving love has impact when it's embodied in the lives of the faithful or of the saints. Whether it's Mother Teresa or the church matriarchs or saints that we've known over the years in our own faith community experience, who may or may not have been biological mothers of children, but who, by being a friend of Christ, who embodies and lives out the self-giving love that is at the essence of Jesus' presence with God and God's presence with him. It's in those relationships and in our seeking to learn from, be shaped by, and emulate in our own lives that kind of faithful experience. It's made possible by the way that Jesus invites those disciples and us into relationship. By remembering that we have been chosen, called out, to be in that special friendship relationship, to abide with him and with God, and because of that to be empowered to live in the ways in which we find even we can love as he loves, by laying down our lives, investing ourselves, committing ourselves in caring relationship. As the story goes, a young boy in a small town in Florida whose home sat just ahead of a small freshwater pond, loved to go swimming, and the ground rule with his mother always was to let her know when he was going back to the pond to swim. On a particularly hot summer day, he was so hot and so invested in going and getting in the pond, he failed to quickly say that as he headed out and tore off his shirt and shoes and jumped into the lake. His mother happened to be standing at the kitchen window and caught the glimpse of him going in, and just as quickly saw on the other side of the pond an alligator moving out towards the point in the pond where her son was. She immediately started screaming, running towards the dock, calling him to swim towards her. At the same time, the alligator made its move towards the boy. And as she extended out and reached for him, they both converged on him at the same time, and an intense tug-of-war started to take place. Fortunately, all the screams and ruckus had caught the attention of a farmer who was driving nearby, who stopped his truck, pulled out his rifle with him as he went down to the pond, saw what was happening, shot and killed the alligator, and miraculously, after many weeks and many surgeries, the boy survived. A local reporter followed up and came and interviewed the boy and asked cautiously and gingerly if he would even be willing to show him the disfiguring scars on his legs as a result of the alligator bites. The boy, without embarrassment, raised his hospital gown, showed him his scarred and disfigured legs, and with the awkwardness the reporter was experiencing all of a sudden, he countered it even more quickly by saying, "But look at these scars too," lifting his arms and saying, "I've got some great scars on my arms," where his mother's fingernails had dug in intensely as she was hanging on to save her son from that alligator. He said, "I've got some great scars because my mom held on to me this hard and I'm still alive." No one has greater love than the one who lays down life for our friends. We are empowered by and loved by one who has chosen us and called us into loving relationship. Called us to be the kind of friends who can embody that love and share that love with the world. We give thanks for that gift on this day. And as we come now in a time of prayer and thanksgiving, a time of investment and commitment, we remember and give thanks for the ways we've experienced that love in our lives. In our time of prayer and response on this Mother's Day, you're invited, as we indicated earlier, with the special envelopes that are in your bulletin. If it's your choice to make a special designated gift to the Disciples Habitat House, to do so in honor or in memory of your mother. During this prayer time, as the opportunity affords itself, to bring that gift forward and to place it in the baskets up front, as a way of offering our thanks, as a way of offering ourselves in prayer to God, that our lives also might be shaped and guided as we seek to be ones who are friends with Christ and who can live out that love in our lives as we have been loved.